Hello, everyone, and welcome to English Insights. Today, we're going to learn about a very special and important part of history, the Millet System of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was a huge and powerful empire that lasted for more than 600 years. It was special because many different kinds of people lived inside it. They spoke different languages, they had different cultures, and they followed different religions. So, how did this big empire manage to keep all these different people living together, often in peace, for such a long time? The answer is largely because of the Millet System. This unique system allowed different religious groups to live in their own way, under their own leaders, all within the big empire. This English story will help you listen and understand this important historical idea. Part 1. What was the Millet System? A way to live together. The Millet System was a smart and important way. The Ottoman Empire managed its many different people. Imagine a very big country, like a huge school, with many different clubs. Each club has its own rules for its members and its own leader, but all clubs are still part of the same big school and follow its main rules. The Millet System was a bit like that for the Ottoman Empire. A millet was a group of people from a certain religion that the government officially recognized. It was like a separate, self-ruling group inside the big Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman government, led by the Sultan, their main ruler, gave these different religious groups a lot of freedom to rule themselves in many daily, internal matters. This was very important. It meant people didn't have to change their religion or completely give up their way of life when they became part of the Ottoman Empire. Why did the Ottomans use this system? They were very practical. Their empire was huge, covering lands in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Millions of people in these lands were not Muslims. Forcing everyone to become Muslim or speak Turkish would have been very hard. It would have caused much anger and likely led to many wars. So, they found a different way. They said, "You can keep your religion, your language, and your customs. Just be loyal to the Sultan and pay your taxes." This practical idea helped the empire be strong and last for many centuries. It allowed different groups to live side by side. Each had its own system, but all were under the same big Ottoman government. This was quite special for empires back then. Part 2. The different millets. Who was who in the empire? In the Ottoman Empire, there were many different millets, one for each religious group. Let's look at the most important ones. The Muslim millet. This was the biggest and most powerful group. The Ottoman Sultan was the leader of the Muslim millet. He was also the Caliph, the leader of all Muslims. All government, military, and main legal systems used Islamic law, Sharia, and were run by Muslims. This was the main ruling millet. Most people in the central parts of the empire were Muslim. The Greek Orthodox millet. This was the biggest Christian millet. Many people in Greece, the Balkans, like Serbia and Bulgaria, and parts of Turkey, were Greek Orthodox Christians. Their millet was led by the Greek Orthodox Patriarch in Istanbul. He was a very powerful leader, not just for religion, but also for many daily things, for his community. He was like a king for his people, but under the Ottoman Sultan. This millet included not only Greeks, but also Serbs, Bulgarians, and Romanians, who were all part of the Orthodox Church. The Armenian millet. Armenians were another large Christian group, especially in eastern Anatolia, eastern Turkey. They had their own Armenian patriarch in Istanbul, who led their millet. They had their own churches, schools, and laws for their community members. Armenians were known for being good at trade and making things. The Jewish millet, Jewish people, had their own important millet. Their millet was usually led by the chief rabbi, Haham Bashi, in Istanbul. He was the main person representing all Jewish communities to the Ottoman Sultan. Jewish people lived in many cities, like Istanbul, Salonika, Izmir, Damascus, Aleppo, Cairo, and in holy cities of Palestine, like Jerusalem, Safed, and Tiberias. They had their own synagogues, places of worship, religious schools, and courts for Jewish law. Other Christian millets. There were also smaller Christian millets. These were for groups like Catholic Armenians, Syrian Orthodox, Jacobites, and later, some Protestant groups. Each of these smaller groups also had their own recognized leaders and some self-rule under the larger Millet system. So, the Ottoman Empire was like a big house with many different families. The Muslim family was the main family and owned the house, but they allowed many other families, the Millets, to live in their own rooms. These families had their own rules, as long as everyone respected the main house rules. And the owner of the house, the Sultan, this detailed system of recognized religious groups was very central to how the empire worked for hundreds of years. It showed that the Ottomans understood and managed the many different religions in their lands. Part 3. How the Millet system worked in daily life. Freedom to be yourself. The Millet system was not just an idea, it worked in the daily lives of millions of people for centuries. It gave non-Muslim groups a lot of freedom to manage their own matters. This meant that for many important parts of their lives, people did not have to follow the rules of the Ottoman government or Islamic law. Instead, they followed the rules of their own religious community. Let's see how the Millet system worked in daily life. Own laws for personal life. This was a big part of the Millet system. Each millet could make its own laws for things like marriage. If a Jewish man and woman wanted to marry, they followed Jewish law and traditions. They did not need to go to an Islamic court. The same was true for Christian people. Divorce. If a husband and wife from a millet wanted to divorce, they followed their own religion's rules for divorce, decided by their religious leaders. Births and deaths. The millet recorded births and deaths for its members. They followed their own religious customs for funerals. Inheritance. When someone died, their property was divided by the laws of their own religion, not Islamic law. Other family matters. Things like adopting children, who takes care of children, custody, and family fights were handled within the millet's own legal system. Own courts and judges. Each millet had its own courts. These courts were run by their own religious leaders or chosen judges. like rabbis for Jewish people, or priests or bishops for Christians. People from that millet went to their own court for personal and family matters. They did not have to go to the main Islamic courts for these issues. This was important because it meant their religious ways were respected. It saved them time and stress, as they could use judges and laws they understood. Own schools and education. Each millet could have its own schools. In these schools, children learned their own language, like Hebrew for Jewish children, Greek or Armenian for Christian children, their own history, and their own religion. They learned to read their holy books and understand their traditions. This was key for keeping their culture and religious identity alive for many generations. The Ottoman government usually did not interfere with what was taught in these schools, as long as they were loyal to the Sultan. Own social services. Millets also had the right to arrange their own social services for their members. This included building and running hospitals just for their people, orphanages, places for children without parents, and charities, groups to help poor people from their own millet. They collected money from their members to pay for these services. This showed strong community support within each millet. Religious buildings. Millets could build and keep their own places of worship, like synagogues for Jewish people and churches for Christians. They could also fix old buildings. This freedom to worship publicly was a very important part of the Millet system. So, this system allowed millions of non-Muslims to live for hundreds of years under Ottoman rule, while keeping their special identities, family ways, and religious practices completely. They did not have to give up who they were. They just had to accept the Sultan's power, be loyal, and pay taxes. This detailed and flexible system was a powerful way to manage a very large and diverse empire. It helped stop constant fights or widespread unhappiness based on religious or cultural differences. It created a society where different groups lived side by side, each with its own internal setup, but all under the peace of the Ottoman Empire. This system was one of the main reasons the Ottoman Empire lasted so long and why it could include so many different peoples peacefully for many centuries. It truly let people be themselves while being part of a larger state. Part 4. Shared cities and daily life. Neighbors and friends in a diverse world. Even with the Millet system, which allowed different groups to have their own internal rules, people from different religions and cultures did not live in completely separate worlds. They lived in the same cities and towns. They were neighbors, people they worked with, and often friends. They shared the same public places and met each other every day. Imagine walking through a busy Ottoman city like Istanbul, the capital, or Damascus, Cairo, Aleppo, or Jerusalem. In these active cities, you could find Muslim, Christian, and Jewish neighborhoods, often very close to each other, sometimes even mixing. The streets would be full of the sounds of different languages, the smells of various delicious foods, and the sights of people dressed in different traditional clothes. It was a rich mix of human life. People from different millets shared many important parts of daily life, markets and trade. This was one of the most common places for people to meet. Everyone went to the same busy markets. Here, a Muslim farmer might sell vegetables to a Jewish merchant. A Christian shoemaker might sell shoes to a Muslim family. People bought and sold things from each other every day, no matter their religion. They might speak different main languages at home, but they often learned enough of each other's words or a common language like Turkish or Arabic to do business. Trade was a strong way to bring people together as everyone needed goods and services from each other. Streets and public spaces. They walked on the same streets, visited the same public squares, and sat in the same coffee houses, popular places for men to talk. They also used the same public bathhouses, called hammams, important for hygiene and social life. Children from different backgrounds and religions might play together. In the streets, learning about each other from a young age. This daily interaction built familiarity, reduced fear, and created a sense of shared city life. Work and cooperation. People often worked together on big projects, like building new parts of the city. They worked together in daily jobs and trades. They moved goods together on long trading trips across the empire. They helped each other in daily work and when needed. If a neighbor had a problem, others, regardless of their faith, often helped. This practical cooperation was essential for community life, shared culture, and influence. Over time, people also shared some parts of their culture, making a special Ottoman mix. For example, they might eat similar delicious foods from the region, like baklava or kebabs, which became popular across all communities. They might listen to similar types of music. Some people might learn a bit of each other's languages or take on certain customs or clothing styles. They often took part in or watched each other's public festivals in the cities. For instance, during a big Muslim festival, like Eid, Christian or Jewish neighbors might visit, bring gifts, or share food, and vice versa. During Christian Easter or Jewish Passover, this created a rich, diverse, and vibrant mix of cultures and traditions unique to the Ottoman Empire. The cities were dynamic and exciting places, full of different sounds, smells, and sights, truly showing the many different people who lived there. This common daily life meant that people were not strangers to each other, even with their different beliefs. This close contact and daily interaction helped build tolerance and understanding, which was vital for keeping peace for many centuries. It showed that living with differences was not just a government rule, but a real part of daily life. Part 5. Coexistence and Safety. Jewish Communities Under Ottoman Rule. A very good example of this long history of living together and even direct caring and safety from local people comes from the history of Jewish people in the Ottoman Empire. For many hundreds of years, Jewish people in different parts of Europe faced terrible dangers, very strong violence, and deep hate. This bad treatment often included being forced to leave their homes, violent attacks on their communities, burning of their houses, and even killing people. This was called persecution, or pogroms. It was a very hard, scary, and unsafe time for them in many European lands. They were often seen as outsiders and blamed for problems. When Jewish people faced such big dangers in Europe, many of them looked for safer places to live. They wanted a place where they could pray freely, live in peace, and start a new life without fear. And very often, they found refuge, a safe place, a shelter from danger, in the big and varied Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Sultan, the ruler, and the local Muslim people often welcomed these Jewish people into their lands and cities. This was especially true after the year 1492. In that year, Spain, a powerful Christian country in Europe, made a rule that forced all Jewish people, and later Muslims, to leave their country if they did not change their religion to Christianity. This was a very big and sad event, forcing many thousands of people to leave their homes and their old ways. Many, many Spanish Jews, called Sephardic Jews, had to leave their homes with almost nothing. They traveled across the sea to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Sultan, Bayezid II, welcomed them. He even said that the Spanish king was foolish to make his country poor and make the Ottoman Empire rich. The Sultan thought these Jewish people were valuable because they brought skills, knowledge, and ways to trade. These Sephardic Jews settled in many big Ottoman cities, like Istanbul, the capital, Salonika, a very important Jewish city then, Izmir, Damascus, Cairo, and of course, in the old holy cities of Palestine, like Jerusalem, Safed, and Tiberias. How did Muslim Palestinians and other local people in the Ottoman Empire directly care for or shelter these Jewish people? Giving entry in safe places, the Ottomans and the local people let these Jewish people come into the empire and live there without fear. They were given places to live, to buy land, and to start their new communities and businesses. Ottoman laws often protected them from the kind of organized attacks they faced in Europe. This was a direct and very important way of caring for them, offering safety from violence and a place to live, letting them keep their religion. Because of the Millet System, these new Jewish groups, along with the older Jewish groups that were already there, could practice their religion freely and openly. They could build and keep their synagogues, places to pray. They could have their own religious schools where they taught Jewish law and Hebrew. They had their own rabbis, religious leaders, who were official leaders in their community. This was very different from Europe, where they often could not pray openly or were forced to change their religion. This freedom to practice their faith without fear was a basic way of supporting and caring for them. It let their culture and religion stay strong. Chances for work and joining society, Jewish people were allowed to work in many jobs without many rules against them. They could open shops. They could trade goods, both in the empire and with other countries. They had good connections with Jewish people in other places. They could join the local economy fully. Many Jewish people became important business people, doctors, lawyers, teachers, printers, and skilled workers in the Ottoman Empire. They helped the empire become richer and more knowledgeable. They were not kept separate from work life, living as neighbors and joining communities. In places like Palestine, new Jewish groups joined older Jewish groups. They lived in the same cities, like Jerusalem, Safed, and Hebron, often side by side with Muslim and Christian Palestinians. The local Arabs, in many cases, truly welcomed them as neighbors. They often learned Arabic, which was the common language for talking and trade. They wore similar traditional clothes. They ate similar local food. They took part in many daily routines and local ways. This showed that the local Muslim and Christian Palestinians did not see them as strangers or enemies. They saw them as people they could trade with, talk to, and live with. They lived together, helped each other daily, and shared good times and bad times within the larger community. This close community life meant that local Palestinians gave social help and a safe feeling to Jewish people, especially to those who were new and needed stability. This very long history of Jewish people finding safety, being accepted, and doing well in the Ottoman Empire, often with the direct help, kindness, and care from local Muslim people, is a very strong example of coexistence and religious tolerance. It clearly shows that it was possible for different religious groups to live together, to grow, and to build communities on the same land for many centuries. This happened even when there were big fights, strong hate, and violent attacks against Jewish people in other parts of the world, especially in 2008 Christian Europe. This history shows a long time when local people, including those in what is now Israel, Palestine, offered safety, a home, and a chance to start new lives to people who needed help, no matter their religion. This history tells us that problems between groups are not the only way. Instead, it shows that good times of peace and helping each other were common and lasted a very long time under the Ottoman rule. Part 6. Challenges to the Millet System and the Empire's End. The changing face of coexistence. Of course, no very big and old empire is ever perfect. The Ottoman Empire, like any country in history, had its problems and hard times. The Millet System usually allowed religious freedom, but it was not a system of full equality in the way we think today. Non-Muslims, for example, often had to pay a special tax called the jizya. This was a tax for non-Muslims in a Muslim country in exchange for protection and the right to practice their religion. Also, non-Muslims usually could not have the very highest government jobs or serve in the army, though later, some changes allowed them in the army and some jobs. There were also sometimes small problems or arguments between different millets or within groups, but these were usually handled well and did not stop the overall peace for many centuries. The fact that the system lasted so long shows it worked well, even with some differences. As the 1800s ended and the 1900s began, the strong Ottoman Empire became weaker. It was often called The Sick Man of Europe by European countries that wanted its lands. The empire faced many new and big problems from inside and from powerful European countries outside. One of the biggest and most powerful new ideas that became strong around the world was nationalism. Nationalism is a strong idea that says each group of people who share a language, culture, and history, a nation, should have its own country, free from others. This idea started to spread quickly across the many different groups. In the Ottoman Empire, it began to break down the old millet system. People no longer wanted to be just a religious group in a big empire. They wanted to be their own independent nation with their own borders and their own government. Greeks wanted their own country and fought for it. Serbians wanted their own. Bulgarians wanted theirs. Arabs in the Middle East wanted their own countries, free from Ottoman rule and free from other countries. And Jewish people, through the Zionist movement, which grew strong in Europe, wanted their own country in Palestine, which they saw as their ancient home and a safe place. The First World War, 1914 to 1918, was the final big end for the Ottoman Empire. It fought on the losing side of the war. After it lost, the empire was completely broken up and divided by the powerful European winners, mainly Britain and France, the land of Palestine, and many other Arab lands, like Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, that were once part of the Ottoman Empire, came under British and French control. This was part of a system called the Millet System by the League of Nations, a group of countries. This huge change from hundreds of years of Ottoman rule to direct European rule changed everything for the millions of people living there. The old millet system slowly ended. New countries were made, like Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. And the stage was set for future big problems, especially over the land of Palestine. This happened because promises were made to both Arabs and Jewish Zionists, which often conflicted. What can we learn? The history of the Ottoman Empire, especially how it controlled and managed many different religions and cultures, with the Millet system, gives us important lessons. It had some problems and was not always perfectly fair, but it was a great example of how a huge empire could let many different people live together for many hundreds of years. It showed that living together was not just a dream, but a real thing for a very long time in these lands. Daily life involved talking, working together, and often helping each other between different religions. The Millet system's success in managing differences for so long shows that different communities can and did live together in complex places. This history reminds us that even with many differences, people can share land and life, often with acceptance and help. This history can help us understand how groups have lived together in the past and give us hope for peace in places that still have problems today.